Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, thank you very much indeed for coming and joining us for the third of Garry Fabian Miller's special lecture series for us here at the Bodleian Libraries in the University of Oxford, called The Light Gatherers. My name is Richard Lumden. I'm Bodleian's librarian and head of Gardens, Libraries and Museums here at the university, and it's my pleasure to extend a welcome to you all this evening, really, as those of you who have been to these lectures before or have watched the videos online know, they are a very special event, and it's wonderful to see so many of you here in the audience again tonight, and I'm sure we will be immersed in the world of Garry.
Garyland.
Garyland,
yeah.
Very shortly. But just to say, really remind you that this is the third of 5 lectures, so next year there will be 2 more, and I encourage you all very warmly to look out for the dates that we will announce for the 2 other lectures. But also to say that next year for us here at the Bodleian will be something of a sort of photography, a year of photography. And there will be 2 major exhibitions outside in our exhibition galleries, one called A New Power, the other Bright Sparks, and we will also have a number of satellite exhibitions and events and workshops which are all being pulled together at the moment and will indeed feature the work of Garry Fabian Miller. So please look out for those announcements when we make them early in 2023. And of course, we will also be publishing a book of Garry's work focused on the end of his chemical practice. That book is to be called The Darkroom and will feature essays by Richard Ingleby and Edmund Duval, and being published by Bodleian Library Publications. Again, look out for the announcements about that. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Garry Fabian Miller for his third Light Gatherers lecture.
Right. For over 30 years, my day has begun walking from my home into the garden, then across the fields, into the woods, and onto the hills, walking into the light, looking intensely, allowing the light to shine upon me. As if my skin and brain were silvered, I become an exposure. I then return to the primitive enclosure of a darkened room, here seeking ways to release these seen and felt experiences. This is a lovely picture by Howard Suley, who's come to every one of these lectures. So Howard's a wonderful man, and he did some lovely photographs in my darkroom. And this is a particularly true one, I think. The darkroom belongs to a family of investigative environments. These are often primitive, improvised spaces, domestic in their scale and resources. They were the sites of independent free thinkers seeking a new understanding of materials, perception, and knowledge. This began with the alchemist's forge, slowly evolving with the science of chemistry, physics, and optics. Those who committed their lives to such places, laboratories in which the materials and the human sought a common agency. Can we just go back one, Sam? Can we move back a slide, Sam? Oh, sorry, no, forward. Yeah. So this is the inside of the darkroom. This is another really good photographer, Philip Sayer, who took this picture. I think that's the kind of where I've given my life to this place. In this place, one becomes fused, codependent, almost a hybrid organism, seeking states of enlightenment. This activity, often within places of darkness, in my case, the Darkroom, this held danger and toxicity, with consequences for the explorers and makers. Marie Curie's laboratory was such a place. A room in which others may have written books or prepared food. In her case, in such a space, she discovered the elements polonium and radium. She died of aplastic anemia, most likely from long-term exposure to radiation. A sense of sacrifice is made in accepting these risks. This is an easily understood example of the negative and positive consequences of becoming exposed, illuminated, while looking into the unknown, seeking to make it visible. The Darkroom was the beginning of photography, a laboratory, the medium's natural habitat, the place in which John Herschel and his friend Fox Talbot created natural magic. This, a wonderful manifestation of a human nature that we had created, a place where deep thought, the meeting of light within darkness upon chemically active surfaces and processes, enabled us to see the world in new ways. On occasions bringing forward visions of wonder, these allowing us to explore systems and processes in a previously unknown way. Yet, equally, these images could exist beyond language as a new branch of the natural world. In these two darkroom exposures, this image, Night Cell, and now exposure, I tried to bring forward experiences found in my night walking on Dartmoor. The intense energy system felt both beneath me, deep within the earth, and its echo above in the night sky. I needed to understand these whilst accepting them as wondrous natural phenomena. In my laboratory, both states could exist. On the Darkroom's exposure wall, the place where the paper is fixed to receive the light. So this is the place in the Darkroom I've inhabited since '97, where the paper is attached to the wall to receive the light. So this kind of section to the right here, with these kind of locating points, and all the pin marks is where the paper has kind of travelled in the dark to arrive to then be exposed to the light. So that's the exposure wall. William Blake's I Want touches a portrait of Charles Darwin. These images have been constant companions as new work was made. Once Darwin had returned from his travels, each lived settled domestic lives in which they sought new ways of understanding in both the imagined and observed world. Their workspaces, simple and improvised, in which close study, deep thought, and intuition enabled a new way of seeing to exist. My pictures of ascending forms, such as this, in ease of gravity, imagine reaching to the moon and the stars. The pictures, or the steps in a picture like Quicken 1, seek to make a ladder towards Blake's moon and a transcendent space beyond. The Darkroom exists in a material world of basic chemistry in which its inhabitants, like other laboratory workers, seek to collaborate with the materials and processes they employ to create something which I think of as a human nature. So this picture here is probably, I think it's 2005, and from a series called Semonios, from a year's work called Year One, and this is a cover of the book Darkroom, which is being published in the spring, and also. Today I've been, these exhibitions Richard's alluded to, I've been looking at various locations, and one of them was the chapel of Balliol, and in there we're going to have the Year One cabinet, which is a kind of repository of these exposures, which are called Year One, and there's a drawer which has this month of exposures in, and drawer 3 has the series Ririos, and in the chapel. So the Year One cabinet's in the chapel, and also there'll be the tapestry I've made from the series Ririos hanging from the ceiling. So we had a really good meeting today about how can we make that happen. In my lifetime, the challenges and realization has become to accept that there are boundaries within this beyond which we can't cross. If we do, nature will suffer, and us as a part of it. The end of the chemical darkroom has long been overdue. Like Marie Curie's radium laboratory, they will be remembered as dangerous places, as well as magical spaces. Those that remain will have to become safe places, existing in a way that echoes aspects of the earliest darkroom methods. The materials and resources used will have to reflect a circularity of production cycles which allow work to be made within safe, sustainable parameters, if at all. One day in early December 2020, I stopped my darkroom clock. I knew no more of my life could be given to this toxic place. This is one of the final boxes of paper. Long past its suggested life cycle, somehow I have still been able to make late exposures from this material. It has now become an archaeological relic of a soon-to-be lost civilization that chose to destroy itself. I look at this late exposure, the Maggot. So this picture I've shown possibly once or even twice before, and it's like seems to become a key picture, and it's from a series of pictures like this. So I'm doing an exhibition next year at Arnolfini called Adore, and it will have the three pieces which work in this series. The Maggot is the best in my view. So this picture exists in a state of flux and auto-destruction. The darkroom created images of both intense beauty while also attempting to destroy itself. I now know it was also attempting to destroy me. I have spent nearly 50 years in the Cibachrome darkroom. Most mornings were given to working in this small, primitive space, so 160 days each year for 50 years, 8,000 days of my life, continuously exposing myself to light and the materials. My wondrous, saturated colour palette came from the azo dyes embedded in the paper. This derived from a manufactured chemical, benzidine. Fortunately, few people chose to work with this material, and even fewer gave 50 years. I did. The consequences were revealed in the early winter of 2020, when I discovered that my chemical darkroom life would now end my life. I was diagnosed with bladder cancer, becoming another casualty of the laboratory. I now live with the consequences of seeking to find a new world. I aspire to make pictures that carry the beauty and joy of an evolving human relationship to the natural world, while aspiring to the intensity and danger of a maximum exposure. An experience imagining the heat and light held in the heart of the sun. I had no choice. So, I suppose with hindsight, I projected myself into the heart of the sun. I wanted to absorb as much light as a human being could absorb. And I suppose that has consequences. The Darkroom allowed me to believe this was possible. I became bewitched. I have paid a high price. I now look back at my life and the work I have made with an inevitable sadness. Yet, I feel fortunate to have been given the opportunity to have made these pictures and to have found a way to have lived a meaningful life. When young, I had sought out guides to help me navigate this life. They were artists, but as importantly, they were writers and gardeners, revolutionary thinkers, makers, weavers, potters, scientists, primarily independent outliers who live life with inherent risk. Their voice is often unheard, many living with limited resources, yet knowing this was the true path and that they had to believe. Here we see James Lovelock and his daughter Christine in 1970 collecting air samples in southwest Ireland. He belonged in the family of explorers working in improvised spaces. In his case, on occasions, the labs of NASA, but more often agricultural outbuildings attached to his home, as when a distant neighbour living in North Devon, then in his latter years, when over 100 in a house on the Great Chesil Bank in Dorset. So, to me, this is huge. I felt, in these last years, there was this massive mind, living this life on the Chesil, ending his life, on top of the ocean there. I knew the chemical darkroom would end. Increasingly, I knew it must end. Lovelock was someone I would always look to in explaining the consequences of our actions, why a human nature had to be rebalanced. Any future chemical darkrooms will have to reflect this, as will my future practice and my life. My darkroom days were over. My future would be shaped by the life lived and sadly given to this place. Looking back, the winter of 1984-85 marks the time I understood that my future in photography would exist without the camera. I would now engage directly with experiences of home and place. The confidence to do this coming from the making of a garden and a time-based relationship to nature through the cultivation and care of plants and trees. Through this, a deeper experience of seasons, weather systems, and the sun's light and energy as an active force within the cycles of life was learned. This truly began with the plant honesty, which grew uninhibited in the herbaceous border. I remember watching the petals fall from the flower, its seed case emerging like a tear, the sunlight drawing forward the greening chlorophyll. The seed began to slowly swell as the day's light extended its growing cycle. As the seasons passed, the weather dried the seed's outer case, time passing, generating a wonderful palette of colour, eventually becoming a translucent cell of white light. Looking at the finished piece, I can see the themes which I have explored over the following 35 years. Photographic exposure moving into deep time. Many of my pictures subsequently taking 24 hours of exposure to appear. Honesty unfolded in real time over 7 months. The making and mixing of colour here by the sun and the seasons. So when I would make pictures like this, this was my life. I would be just moving within the landscape I described earlier and the darkroom, and I'd be observing these changes and gathering this material, and going to the darkroom, and on a particular day printing that line, which made up that moment, and then waiting for time to pass and observe change, and then deciding the point the next line needs to be made. In my last darkroom pictures, pure colour was mixed with light alone. Water was the only intermediary. Honesty made with plant seed case became echoed in late pictures such as the Colour Seed series of 2020, which I will discuss in a while. Flowers allowed me to understand light and exposure in a profound way. Here, one petal head from the delphinium, gathered from its flower spire, held in the enlarger's carrier, breathes in different states of being. This determined by the quantity of light that passes through its tissue. The first image offers the botanical study the correct exposure, yet making pictures such as this, I understood that its essence existed in its dematerializing state, that an exposure reveals. So when I made this picture, where it appeared to be about nothing, and didn't conform to what the photograph should be, I just knew in my heart that the picture existed in this state of nothingness, and somehow the photograph allowed that to exist. But my relationship to the flower was in that kind of incredibly pure end state, not in any kind of notion of how the flower should be. So it's a kind of magic in the flower. So this was a really important picture, delphinium. So this is a picture which doesn't get seen so often, because this was in the V&A Shadow Catchers show, and then it kind of came back to me, and I keep it locked away because I don't want it to leave me. So that's kind of in the treasure chest. Photography could contribute to this vision of natural magic in a unique way. The place painters such as David Jones and Winifred Nicholson had understood. Flowers became chalices of light, as David Jones perceived. So this is a foxglove from our garden on Dartmoor. So foxglove's a flower I've worked with a lot over the years. It's a really special flower, and it grows everywhere where we live. So the painter David Jones, I don't have any examples to show, is a really important artist to me. And at this point I have lots of wonderful things happening in my life, and one of them is, well, two of them is, I'm doing this show at Arnolfini, and we're going to borrow one of the wonderful David Jones chalice paintings, and that's going to be in the show. That's going to mean a huge amount. And also, I'm doing a show, National Museum in Cardiff, and we're going to, of my whole Sea Horizon series, and we're going to have 3 of David Jones porch paintings from Hove, in the show, along with the sea horizons. And they're exactly the same way that I made my sea horizons, was the way he painted those pictures from this open window, looking out onto the sea. So that's another really special moment. Flowers, sparks of light, built of and thrown out into the air as rainbows are thrown in an arc, as dear Winifred Nicholson, who's another kind of really important person to me, understood. Flowers led me into intoxicating states of colour. Red can exist in its saturated state. Yet, as I increase the quantity of light that passed through the red vessel, so this would be the red vessel I would have in the darkroom filled with water. So this would be a solid red, and then as I pass light through it, I would then mix through exposure all the palettes of pink that I might want to make. I could make every possible shade of pink. Some days in the studio, I would give myself over to this blissed out, dazed pink place I had made. So this is this is what it's like in my studio. So it's a pretty blissed out place, and on a good day, and it's just, you know, full intoxication of living in this pink place. I was so proud of myself when I started making pink pictures. I knew I'd really got somewhere really, really special. I didn't know what I was doing, but I just knew this was like really a deep place to be. As in pictures such as these, The Hidden Towers, made in 2017, but still waiting in the studio to reach a state where they feel completed and ready to be to leave and be seen. In the spring of 2020, I was in good spirits through a combination of chance and intuition. I had found a way to cannibalise different supplies of chemistry from different suppliers. At times, the cutting of the white bleach powders are the killer. You know, that's like pure, you know, as I'm about to say, the white bleach powders felt like distributing lines of cocaine. I imagine that. So, you know, I've never been a taker of cocaine, but it's as dangerous as that. And somebody came to the darkroom recently, and when you come to the darkroom now, it's really sad because you go into this kind of closed space, you know, like a kind of mausoleum, really. And it just sits there, and then people come in and it's dead. Nothing happens in it, but it's exactly as you've seen in the earlier picture. And there's like a plastic ice cream tub, and in there is the foil containers which the bleach powder came in, you know, which I'd get from these different obscure, out-of-date suppliers of chemistry, which they would just dump otherwise. As I'd have the powders, and then with a teaspoon, so just like taking drugs, I would be cutting the powder with a spoon and distributing it into the lines, which I needed to mix that batch of chemistry, because this was precious. You know, this was all the bleach left in the world, you know, that I could access, and there it is. And so I showed it to me. I said, look, you know, this is, you know, this should be kept. You know, this is, you know, it's just like a kind of cube of radiation. You know, this is danger. Here it is. You know, there's the foil containers where the chemistry was being cut like that. You know, like as if I'm cutting up a cake. Dreadful. The method, this method I was having to use to keep it going. The method had given me a fragile yet stable source of chemicals to develop the exposed paper, but its instability, once mixed, it could lose its charge and ability to work within 30 hours or so. This meant I now had to spend a week exposing sheets of paper, then over 12 intense hours process these. That's because then the chemistry would die and the images would just not be there. So this was exciting, you know, like kind of, yeah, like taking drugs, I guess. Exciting, and it was really kind of wonderful in a way, but it was so dangerous. The unfolding spring and summer of 2020 would perhaps be the last given to making pictures from these materials. I knew they had to be a celebration of this unique human material. I wanted to make pictures which showed its colour palette knowing these would be its last manifestation. I knew the future, my future, would be lived in a new colour world beyond the danger and darkness of the darkroom. I had been imagining and researching this for some years. These last exposures would be both memorials, but hopefully a bridge into this new world. I began with the colour seeds. I made these by mixing two colours where the individual circles met, this making a third colour. Initially, these seeds of intermingling colour were pure. Here, blue is meeting green and making the aqua colour seed. As time passed, I began to shield, so the seed form, I would begin to shield the seed space and introduce a new colour into the seed. This made by overlapping the colour, then by adding a third, added in mixed by varying periods of time, exposure, creating both the tone and saturation. I began to explore ways to mix colour like sound frequencies. Pink often having the most beautiful and beguiling pitch. The colour seeds culminated in this work, a lost colour palette. So at this point, the end is near. The materials are going to be gone. So at that point, that's what the end was. It wasn't kind of end of me. It was the end of materials. So this is about. I'm so bad when I come out off the hill and into the city. This is 100 inches long. I mean, what's 100 inches? It's big and it's long. 100 inches long. The seeds were now made, waiting to be sown in a new world. I then moved to making the arc. Here I wanted to take my primary colours, blue, yellow and red, then, as with the delphinium flower studies, expose each to increasing quantities of time, exposure, this passing through coloured glass vessels filled with water, these creating the shades of each colour that had been made by my darkroom. So this is the colour chart of my darkroom. The blues on the left side have had 5 seconds of exposure, and those on the right have had 23 minutes. The yellows on the left have had 1 minute and 45 seconds, and these on the right, yellow, middle line, has had 20 hours. The red on the left has had 20 seconds of exposure, and the red on the right's had 40 hours of exposure. So what's that? That's nearly 2 days. So wow, that was an amazing time when I was making this. This went all on over kind of July, August time, because that's a lot of time to be making these exposures. So these pictures, this is going to be in the Arnolfini exhibition. These pictures, what I would do is expose the whole sheet of paper. So that's individual unique exposures. This is the last series of unique exposures. And I would expose the 12/16, I think it is. That's 12 by 16 inches. 12 by 16 inches of paper to the red light. So that would just be a sheet of red paper exposed. And then I would put the square. This is all done in the dark. I would locate a solid square of material on top of the full sheet of red. And then I would expose the sheet of paper to white light from the beam of the enlarger, and it would erase all the outside red and just leave the core of red in the square. And by doing that, you end up with, when you see this picture, you see this beautiful square of red with this kind of drawn line around it, made by the light trying to creep behind the square to erase it. So a lot of work I did had things to do with the way painters put paint on and take it off. I sat and looked at my now lost family of colour, made from the ancient dye destruction prints embedded colour gamut. I felt a humility, a joy, with a sadness that this life has now ended. The Ark, a repository for the Seal Crown palette, the memory bank to help me navigate the making of a new colour in a new way. Over the last decade, I had begun to wonder where I would turn when the darkroom closed. There were so many possibilities. I had increasingly understood that my future, our future, would come from working collaboratively. During these last 10 years, my exposures have become the fuel for new ways of composing, making and creating. So this kind of life beyond the darkroom in a bigger world of relationships and collaboration is just been a wonderful period. Long ago, I had discovered the weaver and maker of natural dyes, Ethel Murray. This is the Queen Ethel. In Robin Tanner's writing about the pioneers of handwork, who in the early 20th century developed a new understanding of materials and ways of living. When I was a teenager, Robin Tanner, who I met as a Quaker and a peace activist, led me into a world I felt I could be, a world in which I felt could be my home. He was the first person I saw living the kind of integrated, multidisciplinary life I aspired to. Here, with his wife, Heather. So these are like Frontline revolutionaries. Robin and Heather Tanner. Wow. If you go to the Craft Study Centre in Farnham, their archive is, wow. It's amazing. It's just full of magic. Objects that they collected from Ethel Murray, other makers, but also all their activism, environmentalism, political action, work for refugees. These are the real deal, these people. Together they built a home and made a garden, Old Chapel Field at Kington Langley in the Cotswolds. Here they lived a rich life together for 58 years. This provided the foundation for their work and uncompromising activism. Robin's pioneering work in the Ministry of Education in reimagining the teaching of arts and crafts. So when I was young, and as a young artist in my 20s, you'd make a living doing art kind of education projects. And if you'd meet a good county, I'm not sure what they were called, they were people, I don't even know if they exist, they probably don't, do they, in this fallen apart world? But local authorities would have their specialist member staff to do with the teaching of arts and crafts, who would run courses and offer infrastructure and support for art teachers in primary and secondary schools within the county that they were the officer or whatever their title was. And when I would meet these people, the really good ones, the ones which really knew how art could change people's lives and children's lives, Robin Tanner was like a hero for these people. So that's what he did to make a living. That was his job. But in the house, in his home, he made his great etchings, such as this one. This is autumn 1934. This is made in his dining room, I think, pretty much. And there are many wonderful books that they made of illustrations of plants and flowers. This is a picture of mine. This is going to be in the Arnolfini show. This is a fantastic picture. I saw this when I was young, and then later in my life I could acquire a copy of it. That was a very important time. In their kitchen, tea drunk from cups and teapots made by Lucy Ree and Hans Cowper. So these pictures are from albums in the archives at the Craft Study Centre. And this is just domestic life. And this is how, my wife and I have tried to live our lives. The Tanners led me to Ethel, her weaving, and her great book, a book on vegetable dyes. This was written when she lived at Chipping Camden, and I rarely leave Dartmoor, like twice. Once to come here to do the last lecture, and then I went to Chipping Camden to visit some gardens, and I went and stood in front of the hedge behind which Ethel Mary was living when she was coming to the Bodleian here to research this book. So that's like, and I spoke to the people in the small little museum in Chipping Camden, and they could see I was a real frontline follower of the community. It's lovely. She's just had an exhibition in Barnstable Museum. So she comes from Devon, Ethel Mary. A hero. So I was fortunate to be given a copy of Douglas Pepler's 1916 first edition of this book. I held it and knew within this lay the future. So I was given this, I'm 66 in January, and I was given this book when I was 60 by my wife. And, so 6 years later, this book's going to come to life now. We're going to talk about that in a moment. I propose to grow an acre of each of the three primary colours, whose characteristics Ethel Mary described in 1916. The blue of woad, European indigo, is Sartus tintoria, the yellow of wild, Rosada intolia, and the rose red of madder, Rubia tinctorium. I had wondered if this idea would ever happen. So this is probably about 2 or more years old, this proposal. So I wondered if this would ever come to fruition. Yet somehow, in these times of ending and transition, it will. We have a site here in the Vale of Pewsey, so quite close to Oxford. So in this very special place, a really charged area of Wessex, I suppose we could say, we're going to grow the colour. It will be slow, perhaps taking 5 years, combining along the way elements of land art, environmental agriculture and horticulture. It will embody craft and landscape traditions I so admire. At the same time, it belongs to the parallel re-examination across all cultures of the relationship between light, colour and material possessions. It questions how we extract and use materials, their environmental cost, their life cycle. The future is no longer a line reaching upward, blind to the consequences of human growth. We now need a different understanding of the human and nature in which we are just a part. The future is a circle in which life cycles safely turn, understanding how we make and then return. When 3 acres reaches fruition, I imagine 3 blocks of latent colour, blue, yellow, red, safely processed. These then given to cooperatives, makers, weavers and dyers, artists, students, schools, all of you. If I am able, I will use some of these first batches of pigment to make a new version of the arc, now illuminating the grid sequence with all the yellows of weld, the blues of woad and the reds of madder. I hope it will help throw light into a new rebalanced world where to be human means we re-understand the wonder and fragility of natural magic. Now, with the humility in creating sustainable cycles of production, together I believe it is still not too late to help make a brighter and more beautiful world, embracing Ethel Mary's full joy of life. As Winifred Nicholson believed, the joy of colour is inborn within each of us. This is one half of the poster I made for a show I curated for the Craft Study Centre about these kind of heroic figures: Ethel Mary, Robin Tanner, Richard Batterham, the great Richard Batterham, Elizabeth Peacock, one of Ethel Mary's students. That's 4. Was there a 5th? Possibly. And my work, and we were in kind of dialogue. And aspects of this exhibition will be extended and be part of the Arnolfini Adore exhibition. Some time ago, I made this exposure, the colour field, black ground. This has now become a hinge work. So I guess I made this picture. This predates the arc, and I've made this picture, this black square, and I knew it was important, but I didn't know really what it was. So it kind of sat in the studio waiting to understand where it belonged. And then 2 or 3 years later, I started making all the colour fields. The colour fields are the rectangular and square pieces of colour. So this is now called the colour field black ground. My darkroom had absorbed the whole spectrum of my visual experience. I see this late picture as the loamy soil, the fertile earth into which I and others will sow the seeds of the new world of safe and sustainable colour. In the veil, they will grow roots of a different fugitive. A fugitive is one of the great descriptive colour words of Ethel's in the book. Fugitive colour is magic, of a natural colour palette. I hope I live to see this place. And that I'm able to contribute to the safe closure of chemical darkrooms and the creation of a new darkroom practice. However, this is for others to make. This isn't my task. My task is to make the colour fields. Next spring, the Bodleian, as Richard said, is going to provide a platform for discussion through exhibitions and workshops, and hopefully my 4th lecture, which will look at this community, which is called, has lots of names, but let's call it the Sustainable Darkroom Community, which is trying to find a new kind of darkroom practice, which kind of conforms to the things I'm wanting to exist, the things which James Lovelock tells us we have to do. So that's exciting, and I've had a good day today going around with Philip Roberts, the curator, discussing the possibilities for making this work next spring. I think I'm going to stop there because there'll be no questions. Because there should be questions. Thank you very much.